He simply thought he was hiring a new maid. He never imagined that the young woman he was about to open his door to was carrying a past he had buried 30 years ago, a past he believed was gone forever. They say that time hides our mistakes. But time does not erase them. It only keeps them safe, until the right moment comes to bring them back. When their eyes met for the very first time, something squeezed tight inside Mr. Caleb's chest. A strange feeling. A pull he could not explain. Like recognizing a song you haven't heard since you were young, but cannot quite remember the name of. What he did not know yet, what he could not possibly have known, was that the young woman standing at his door was his own daughter. The child he had abandoned before she was even born. The child he had never once gone looking for. Hello friends. Welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe. Also, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? New York? Trinidad and Tobago? Maybe South Africa or Jamaica? We want to know. The morning was still and quiet in Mr. Caleb's large villa. He was sitting in his office, which opened into the living room, going through a stack of documents with the same focused expression he wore every single day. His coffee sat on the corner of the desk, cooling slowly. He hadn't touched it in 20 minutes. He didn't notice. Mr. Caleb was 61 years old. He was a tall man with graying hair, a straight back, and eyes that were sharp and careful, the kind of eyes that didn't miss much. He had built his company, Caleb and Partners Construction, from almost nothing, through years of hard work and very few shortcuts. He was respected in the city. People called him Sir without being asked to. He lived alone in this big, beautiful house. And most of the time that was exactly how he liked it. There was a soft knock at the office door. He looked up. It was Grace, his housekeeper of 5 years. She was standing in the doorway in her work clothes, her hands folded neatly in front of her, her usual warm smile on her face. But that morning something about her face was different. A little tense. A little careful. Sir, she said gently. Can I speak with you? Of course, Grace. He set down his pen and gestured toward the chair across from his desk. Come in. Sit down. She came in and sat, placing her hands on her knees, one on top of the other. She looked like someone who had been practicing what to say and still wasn't quite sure how to say it. Mr. Caleb waited. He was a patient man. After a short silence, Grace took a slow, deep breath. Sir, she said, I have made a decision. I am going to stop working here. The words landed like something heavy being set down on the floor. Mr. Caleb stayed very still. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. Stop working here, he repeated quietly. Grace, have I done something wrong? Is there a problem you haven't told me about? She shook her head quickly and her smile came back. A real smile this time, full of something that looked like hope. No, sir. No problem at all. On the contrary. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I have been saving money for a long time. Little by little, every month. And last week, I enrolled in a training program. She lifted her chin slightly with quiet pride. It has been my dream for a very long time, sir. To become a certified caregiver. I want something more for my life. Something stable, something meaningful. I feel ready now. A silence settled over the room. Then slowly Mr. Caleb's face changed. The stiffness softened. He nodded, not the quick nod he gave when approving business decisions, but a slower one, more thoughtful. Grace, he said. I will be honest with you, I did not see this coming. He looked at her steadily. But I understand. And I am proud of you. I mean that. Her eyes went a little bright. Thank you, sir. You have always been fair to me. It is because of this work, this salary, that I was able to save it all. I owe you more than you know. He waved his hand slightly, the way he always did when he didn't want too much fuss. But there was something in his eyes now, a quiet concern. I will miss you, he said simply. And I won't pretend otherwise. This house is large. I cannot manage without someone to help me. You know that. Grace sat up a little straighter. She had been waiting for exactly this moment. I know, sir. And I did not want to leave you without a solution. So I have already thought of someone. She placed both palms flat on her knees. A young woman I know well. She was my neighbor years ago when I lived in the old neighborhood. She is calm, hardworking, and very respectful. She has been looking for steady work for some time now. She paused. She is a serious person, sir. I can say that honestly. Mr. Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly, not with suspicion, but with the habit of a man who had learned to think carefully before agreeing to anything. Someone you know well, he said. Not just someone you've met a few times? No, sir. I have known her for years. I spoke to her yesterday. She is willing to come and try. If you agree, I can bring her with me tomorrow morning and introduce her properly. That was Grace. Even while leaving a job, she was still thinking about the person she was leaving behind. That kind of loyalty was rare, and Mr. Caleb knew it. He studied her face for a few long seconds. Then he gave a single nod. All right, he said. If you trust her, then I will trust your judgment. Bring her tomorrow. I am counting on you. Grace's smile spread wide and warm across her whole face. Thank you, sir. You will not regret it. She stood, bowed her head slightly the way she always did, and walked back toward the kitchen. Mr. Caleb watched her go. He felt something, a small, quiet melancholy, the way you feel when something comfortable is about to change. But he also felt something else underneath it. Something he couldn't quite name. He picked up his pen and looked back at his documents. Just a new maid, he told himself. A small change. Nothing more. He tried to return to his work. The words on the page were the same words they had been 5 minutes ago. But somewhere deep in his chest, something was humming. A low, strange feeling. Like the air before a storm, when everything goes very still and the birds stop singing and the world holds its breath for just a moment. Right before everything changes. He did not know why he felt it. He did not know that tomorrow morning, a young woman would walk through his front door and bring 30 years of buried truth back with her, carried quietly without knowing it, in her face, in her eyes, in the name written on a birth certificate she kept folded in her bag. He did not know any of that yet. He simply picked up his cold coffee, took one sip, made a small face and went back to his documents. Outside, the city went on as usual. Loud and bright and rushing forward, the way cities always do. And somewhere across town, a young woman named Rebecca was combing her hair, putting on a clean blouse and getting ready to go meet her friend Grace. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring. Neither did he. Rebecca had lived in the same small apartment for 4 years. It was on the 4th floor of a tired old building that groaned when the wind blew and had a lift that worked maybe 3 days out of 7. The walls were thin, the windows were small, and in the rainy season, a patch of damp appeared in the corner of the ceiling like an uninvited guest who refused to leave. But the apartment was hers. She had paid for it herself, kept it clean herself, fixed what she could herself. And in the way that a place becomes yours not because it is beautiful but because you have poured your quiet effort into it, it was home. Her room was simple. A narrow bed with a blue blanket folded neatly at the foot. A wooden table with 2 chairs. A small shelf holding a few books, a well-worn Bible and one framed photograph. The photograph was of her mother. Her name had been Victoria. She was young in the picture, maybe 20, maybe 21, standing in a garden somewhere, her head tilted back slightly, laughing at something just outside the frame. She looked free. She looked like someone who had not yet been hurt by the world. Rebecca looked at that photograph every morning. Not always for long. Sometimes just a glance, a greeting almost, a way of saying I remember you. I still carry you with me. This morning she looked at it a little longer than usual. She wasn't sure why. She touched the edge of the frame gently, the way she always did, and then set it down and finished getting ready. Her mother had raised her alone from the very beginning. Rebecca had grown up knowing only one parent. One pair of hands that braided her hair in the mornings, one voice that said her name at night, one person who showed up every single time. Victoria had worked as a seamstress, taking in clothes to mend and alter from people in the neighborhood. She worked from a small table near the window, her needle moving fast and steady, her reading glasses sliding down her nose. They didn't have much. But they had enough. And Victoria made sure Rebecca always felt it. She bought Rebecca books. She helped her with homework even when she was exhausted. She made sure Rebecca went to church every Sunday in a clean dress, even if the dress had been mended at the hem. On Rebecca's birthdays she would bake a small cake, nothing fancy, just a simple vanilla cake with a little icing, and sing to her in a soft, slightly off-key voice that Rebecca had loved completely. Rebecca had been happy. In the simple, uncomplicated way that children are happy when they feel safe and loved. But there had always been one question sitting quietly at the back of everything. Where is my father? She had asked it for the first time when she was about 6 years old. She had come home from school where a teacher had asked the class to draw a picture of their family, and Rebecca had drawn herself and her mother and then looked at the empty space beside them and not known what to put there. Victoria had been quiet for a long time after that question. She was mending a blue dress, and she kept her eyes on the needle when she finally answered. His name was Simon, she said. Her voice was flat and careful, like someone walking on a floor they were not sure would hold them. We were young. Things did not work out. But where is he? Rebecca had pressed. Does he know about me? Pause. The needle went in and out of the fabric. He knew, Victoria said. very quietly. He chose not to stay. Rebecca had not fully understood it then. She was 6. But she had understood the feeling, the way her mother's shoulders dropped slightly when she said those words, the way she set the dress down for just a moment and pressed her lips together before picking it up again. She understood it better as she got older. And when she was 16, her mother became sick. It came quickly. That was the thing about it. One week Victoria had a cough. The next week she was tired in a way that sleep did not fix. By the third week she could not get out of bed. A neighbor took them to the hospital, and the doctor spoke in a low voice that Rebecca was not supposed to hear but did. She sat outside the ward on a hard plastic chair and stared at the floor and felt the world rearranging itself around her into a shape she did not want. Her mother died on a quiet Tuesday morning. The ward was bright with morning sun. A nurse had opened the window. There was a bird singing outside, a loud, cheerful, completely inappropriate bird, and Victoria had looked at Rebecca and held her hand and said her name once, softly, like a full sentence. And then she was gone. Rebecca was 16 years old. She was alone. And she had a question that now had no one left to answer it. She had finished school on a scholarship for children who had lost parents. She had worked small jobs, helping at a grocery store, washing clothes for neighbors, running errands for a pharmacy nearby. She had learned to stretch money the way her mother had taught her, carefully, without waste. She had built a small life. Quiet, independent, dignified. But she had never been able to stop wondering. Not in a loud, angry way. Rebecca was not an angry person. But in a still, deep way, the kind of wondering that lives at the bottom of you, that you carry around without noticing it until something bumps into it and reminds you it is there. Who was he? Was he still alive? Did he ever think about her? Did he ever wonder what happened to the child he had walked away from? Did he even remember? She never spoke these questions out loud to anyone. They felt too private, too raw. Like showing someone a bruise you'd learned to protect. She simply carried them. The way she carried everything, quietly and without complaint. Grace's message had come the evening before, just after Rebecca had finished eating. Can you come tomorrow morning? I have something to talk to you about. I think it might be good news for you. Rebecca had smiled at her phone. Grace was like that, always looking out for her, always thinking of ways to help without making it feel like help. They had been neighbors years ago, back when Rebecca first moved to the city, and Grace had been the first person to knock on her door with a plate of food and a wide smile and no expectation of anything in return. That kind of friendship stayed. She replied, "I'll be there." And now, the next morning, she locked her apartment door, tucked her keys into her bag, and made her way down the 4 flights of stairs and out into the city. The bus was crowded the way it always was. Rebecca stood near the window and watched the city move past her. The bread sellers pushing their carts. The school children walking in pairs, bags bouncing on their backs. The yellow taxis honking at nothing in particular. A woman on the side of the road selling tomatoes from a wide metal tray balanced on her head, completely still, completely unbothered by the noise around her. Rebecca watched it all and felt the quiet, ordinary comfort of a morning that seemed like any other morning. She got off at her stop, walked down 2 streets and turned onto the wide, calm road lined with tall palm trees. She had been here before, once or twice to visit Grace, and she always felt the same thing when she turned onto this street. A slight shift, like stepping into a different part of the city. Quieter. Greener. The houses behind their high walls and iron gates looking permanent and unhurried, as if they had always been there and always would be. She found the gate and pressed the bell. It opened almost immediately. Grace was standing there in her work uniform, her face bright. "You came," she said, and pulled Rebecca into a quick, warm hug. "Of course." Rebecca laughed softly. "What's all this about? Come in, come in." Grace stepped aside and waved her through. "I'll explain properly. But first," she lowered her voice slightly, glancing back at the house, "I want you to meet someone." Rebecca walked through the gate, along the neat flower-lined path, toward the front door of the large white villa. She noticed the garden, how clean it was, how deliberately kept. The red and yellow flowers stood in straight rows. The grass was trimmed to an even, perfect height. Even the stepping stones leading to the door were set at precise, equal distances. Someone likes things a certain way, she thought. Grace led her inside. The house was cool and still. A long hallway stretched ahead, with polished tiled floors and framed paintings on the walls. The light came in through tall windows and long golden stripes. Everything was clean and in its place. "Wait here," Grace said, pointing to a bench in the hallway. "I'll go and tell him you're here." "Tell who?" Rebecca asked. But Grace was already walking toward the study at the end of the hall. Rebecca sat on the bench, placed her bag on her lap, and looked around at the quiet, orderly world of this house. She could hear a clock ticking somewhere, the faint rustle of papers, the distant, muffled sound of the city outside, made even smaller by the thick walls. Then she heard footsteps, steady, unhurried, coming closer. She straightened slightly and looked toward the hallway, and Mr. Caleb appeared in the doorway. He was tall, silver-haired. He was wearing a pressed white shirt and dark trousers, and he walked with the kind of quiet confidence that comes not from arrogance but from a lifetime of knowing exactly where he stands in a room. He looked at her, and something happened. It was nothing you could see from the outside. No gasp, no sudden movement, just a pause. So brief it lasted less than a second. His eyes met hers and something behind them shifted, the way a flame shifts when a small breath of air reaches it. A feeling, familiar and strange at the same time. Like a word on the tip of the tongue that won't come forward. He blinked and the moment passed. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and even. "You must be Rebecca." "Yes, sir," she said, standing. "Good morning." He studied her face for just a moment longer than was necessary, so briefly that she barely noticed it. Then he gestured toward the sitting room. "Come in," he said. "Let's talk." She followed him inside. Neither of them spoke about the strange feeling that had passed between them. Neither of them had the words for it yet. But it was there. Quiet. Patient. Waiting. Like a door that had not yet been opened, but whose handle had just, very gently, been touched. The sitting room was large and neat, the way the rest of the house was neat. Everything in its place, nothing extra, nothing out of order. There were two deep leather chairs facing each other across a low wooden table. A tall bookshelf covered most of one wall, filled with thick books arranged by size. A single potted plant sat in the corner by the window, dark green leaves healthy and still. On the wall above the fireplace hung a large painting of a river moving through tall trees, the kind of painting that didn't ask you to feel anything in particular but gave you a sense of quiet all the same. Mr. Caleb sat in one of the leather chairs and gestured for Rebecca to take the other. She sat down carefully, her bag on her lap, her back straight but not stiff. She had learned a long time ago how to sit in a room that wasn't hers, how to be present without taking up more space than was offered to her. Grace hovered near the doorway for a moment, then quietly disappeared toward the kitchen, leaving the two of them alone. Mr. Caleb looked at Rebecca. Rebecca looked at Mr. Caleb. "Grace has told me about you," he began. His voice was level and measured, the voice of a man who chose each word before he said it. "She speaks well of you. That matters to me because Grace does not say things she doesn't mean." "She has always been kind to me," Rebecca said. "How long have you known her?" "About 6 years, sir. We were neighbors when I first moved to this part of the city. She was the first person who was friendly to me when I arrived." Mr. Caleb nodded slowly. "And what kind of work have you done before this?" Rebecca placed her hands quietly on her bag. "Various things, sir. I worked at a grocery store for 2 years, stocking shelves, helping customers, keeping the stockroom organized. Before that I helped an elderly woman in her home, cooking, cleaning, running errands. I also did some tailoring work on the side." She paused. "I learn quickly and I don't need to be told the same thing twice." The corner of Mr. Caleb's mouth moved, not quite a smile but something close to it. An acknowledgement. "What made you leave the grocery store?" he asked. "The owner closed it down. His family moved away and he went with them." She said it simply without any self-pity. "And the elderly woman?" "She passed away. Her children sold the house." A brief pause. "It was a good job while it lasted. She was a gentle person." Mr. Caleb was quiet for a moment. He was watching her the way he watched everything, carefully without rushing. "This house," he said, "runs on a schedule. I wake early. I work long hours. I don't like noise when I'm working and I don't like things being moved from where they belong." He said this plainly, not unkindly. "I am not a difficult man but I am a particular one. Do you understand the difference?" "Yes, sir," Rebecca said. "Difficult means nothing is ever right. Particular means everything has a right place." She met his eyes. "I can work with particular." This time the almost smile became a real one, small, brief, but genuine. It appeared and disappeared so quickly that Rebecca wasn't entirely sure she had seen it. He glanced down at his hands for a moment, then back up at her. "I will be straightforward with you," he said. "Grace has worked in this house for 5 years. She knows every corner of it. She knows my routine, my preferences, how I like things done. She is leaving, and that is a gap that will not be easy to fill." He said it without drama, simply as a fact. "I am not looking for someone who will try to impress me in the first week and then relax. I need someone consistent. Someone who does the same good work on a Tuesday as they do on the first day. I understand, Rebecca said. Good. He straightened slightly in his chair. The job is 6 days a week. Sundays are yours. There is a small room at the back of the house. It's clean and private. You are welcome to stay here or continue living where you are currently and come in each morning. That choice is yours. Rebecca thought for just a second. I will come in each morning, sir, if that is all right. I'm used to my own space. He nodded as if he understood that perfectly, as if he, more than most people, understood the need for a space that was entirely your own. Very well, he said. He stood up, which meant the conversation was over, and he extended his hand. Rebecca stood and shook it. His handshake was firm and brief. Grace will show you around the house today, he said. She will explain the routine. You can begin properly next Monday. That gives you a few days to arrange your things. Thank you, sir, Rebecca said. He gave a small nod and turned to walk back toward his study. Then he stopped, just for a moment, without turning around. Rebecca, he said. Sir? Pause. Short but noticeable, as if he had started a sentence and then changed his mind about how to finish it. Welcome, he said simply. And he walked away down the hall. Grace was waiting in the kitchen, standing by the counter with a glass of cold water, trying very hard to look like she hadn't been listening. Well, she whispered the moment Rebecca came in. He said I can start Monday, Rebecca said. Grace pressed both hands together and looked up at the ceiling. Thank God. Then she put the glass of water in Rebecca's hand. Drink. You looked nervous. I wasn't nervous, Rebecca said, and then took a long sip of water. Grace laughed quietly. Come. Let me show you everything before he hears us talking and comes out. They moved through the house room by room, Grace explaining each one in a low, efficient voice, the way someone passes on something they have spent years learning. The kitchen first. He has his eggs scrambled. Not wet, not dry, in the middle. 2 minutes on the heat after you turn it down, then off. Brown toast, not white. Orange juice in a glass, not a cup. She opened a cabinet and pointed to where each thing lived. Every single thing goes back exactly where it came from. He knows if it doesn't. Rebecca listened and looked and said nothing, taking it all in. The dining room. He eats breakfast alone. He eats dinner alone. He never eats with the television on. If he is on a phone call while eating, do not disturb him. He will wave when he is ready for the next course. The study. Grace stood at the doorway and did not go in. This room you clean only when he is out of the house. Never while he is inside. Move nothing on the desk. Wipe around it. The shelves you can dust, but put everything back in the same position. She pointed at the desk across the room, where Mr. Caleb was already sitting back down, reading, his reading glasses on, completely still. He works in there most of the morning. Rebecca looked at the study. On the wall beside the bookshelf, she noticed a few framed photographs. One of them showed a younger Mr. Caleb, perhaps in his 40s, standing in front of a building with his arms crossed, looking into the camera with serious eyes. He looked the same as he did now, only younger and less silver. There was something about the photograph. She wasn't sure what it was. It was just a photograph of her employer as a younger man. There was nothing strange about it. And yet her eyes stayed on it a second longer than they needed to. Rebecca? Grace touched her arm. She looked away. Sorry? What was next? They finished the tour. The sitting room, the laundry room, the guest bedrooms upstairs that were never used, the linen cupboard that was organized so precisely it looked like it had been done by a machine. By the time they came back downstairs, it was almost noon. They sat together at the small kitchen table, and Grace poured 2 cups of tea. Outside the kitchen window, the garden sat in the bright midday sun, very green and very still. He is a good man, Grace said, wrapping both hands around her cup. I want you to know that before I leave. He can seem cold at first, all that quiet, all that control. But he is fair. He has never raised his voice at me. Not once in 5 years. She looked at Rebecca. Some people, you work for them and you feel small. He does not make you feel small. Rebecca nodded slowly. What does he do in the evenings? Reads. Sometimes watches the news, but only for 30 minutes, then he turns it off. On Fridays he sometimes has a glass of whiskey in the sitting room. Grace smiled. He talks to himself sometimes when he's in the study. Very quietly. I don't think he knows he does it. Rebecca smiled at that. Does he have family who visits? She asked. Grace thought for a moment. He has a friend, Mr. Benjamin, who comes from time to time. They've known each other since they were boys. Other than that. She shrugged gently. No, not really. No wife. No children that I know of. She paused, looking down at her tea. It is a big house for one person. But that is his choice, and I have learned not to wonder about it too loudly. Rebecca looked out at the garden again. A bird had landed on the fence, a small ordinary brown bird, and was sitting there doing nothing in particular, looking around with quick, bright eyes. No children that I know of. She didn't know why those words sat in her chest for a moment before moving on. She finished her tea, helped Grace wash the cups, and said her goodbyes at the gate. Monday morning, Grace said, holding the gate open. 7 o'clock. Don't be late, he will notice. I won't be late, Rebecca said. She walked back down the palm tree street toward the bus stop, her bag over her shoulder, the midday sun warm on the back of her neck. The city was loud again out here, the honking, the voices, the smell of roasting food drifting from somewhere nearby. She let it wash over her. It is a big house for one person. She thought about the neat garden, the perfectly arranged kitchen cabinets, the quiet study. The man who ate alone and read alone and moved through his large, beautiful house like a person who had made peace with his own silence. She thought about her mother's small apartment, where everything had been just enough. Where the needle moved in and out of fabric by the window and the birthday cakes were small and slightly lopsided and everything was warm with being loved. She thought about her father, the one whose name she carried as a question, not an answer. His name was Simon. He chose not to stay. The bus came. She got on. She found a seat by the window. She watched the city go by and let herself feel, quietly and privately, the thing she always felt when she was about to start something new, a small, steady hope. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that simply shows up, every time, no matter how many times the world has given it reason not to. Whatever this new job was, she would do it well. She always did. Monday came the way Mondays always do, quickly and without asking if you were ready. Rebecca was up at 5:30. She showered, dressed in clean, simple clothes, and made herself a small breakfast, bread and tea, eaten standing at her kitchen counter because her table was covered with the things she had been sorting through the night before. She had wanted to make sure she left her apartment tidy before starting the new job. It felt important, somehow. Like beginning something properly. She looked at her mother's photograph before she left. "Wish me luck," she said quietly. The photograph said nothing, of course. But the woman in it was still laughing, still tilting her head back, still looking free. Rebecca picked up her bag and went downstairs. She arrived at the villa at 6:55. 5 minutes early. She pressed the bell and waited, her bag over her shoulder, the morning air still cool and smelling faintly of wet grass from somewhere nearby. The gate opened. But it was not Grace who opened it. It was Mr. Caleb himself, dressed already in his work trousers and a white shirt, reading glasses pushed up on his head. He looked at her, then at the small watch on his wrist, then back at her. 5 minutes early, he said. "Good morning, sir," Rebecca said. He stepped aside to let her through. Grace left a folder in the kitchen. "Everything she told you is written down in it, the schedule, the shopping list, the house rules. Read it today when you have time." He was already turning back toward the house as he spoke. "Coffee is in the third cabinet on the left. The kettle is already filled." "Yes, sir. I take my breakfast at 7:30. He glanced back once. "Not 7:25. Not 7:40. 7:30, Rebecca said. He nodded and went inside. Rebecca stood in the garden for just a moment, alone, looking up at the big white house in the early morning light. She breathed in slowly through her nose. "All right," she thought. "Let's begin." The first day was about learning. She moved through the house quietly and carefully, the way you move in a place that is not yet yours, touching only what needed to be touched, opening only what needed to be opened. She read Grace's folder at the kitchen table while the kettle heated, 3 pages of neat handwriting, organized exactly the way the kitchen cabinets were organized, everything in its right place. She prepared Mr. Caleb's breakfast exactly as Grace had described. Scrambled eggs, 2 minutes after turning down the heat, then off. Brown toast. Orange juice in a glass. She carried it to the dining table at 7:29 and set it down without a sound. At 7:30 Mr. Caleb walked in, sat down, unfolded his napkin and looked at the plate. He said nothing. But he picked up his fork and began eating, and that, Rebecca decided, was good enough. She went back to the kitchen, washed what needed washing, and began the morning's cleaning. Grace had been right about the house. Every room had its order. Every surface had its arrangement. And Rebecca, who had always been a careful and observant person, quickly understood the logic of it, not because she was told but because she paid attention. The paintings in the hallway were hung at exactly the same height. The books on the shelves were not just organized by size but, she noticed, also loosely by subject. The kitchen towels were folded in thirds, not halves. The mat at the front door was always centered. She could tell by the marks on the floor where it had sat for years. She cleaned and tidied and replaced everything exactly as she found it. By midday the ground floor was done. She had made lunch, a simple plate of rice and stew, which she left on the dining table at exactly 1 o'clock as the folder had said, and was working her way quietly through the upstairs hallway. She moved past the guest bedrooms, past the linen cupboard, and stopped at the end of the hall where a window looked down over the back garden. Below, she could see the mango tree Grace had mentioned. It was large and old, its branches spreading wide and low. A wooden bench sat beneath it in the shade. It was the one part of the garden that looked slightly less controlled than the rest, slightly more natural, as if it had been allowed to simply be. She wondered if Mr. Caleb ever sat there. She went back to her cleaning. The days settled into a rhythm. By the end of the first week, Rebecca knew the house the way she knew her own small apartment. Not just where things were, but how they felt. The way the third step on the staircase creaked slightly if you stepped on the left side. The way the morning light moved through the sitting room, starting at the bookshelf and slowly crossing the floor until it reached the far wall by mid-morning. The way the whole house went very still between 1 o'clock and 2, when Mr. Caleb ate lunch alone and the clock in the hallway seemed to tick a little louder. She learned his rhythms too, the way Grace had warned her she would need to. He was always in his study by 6 in the morning. He did not like to be interrupted before 9 unless it was urgent. He ate quietly and quickly without ceremony. He moved through the house with purpose, never wandering, never idle, as if he had decided where he was going before he stood up. He did not speak much to her beyond what was necessary. A good morning. A brief instruction. A quiet thank you when she set down his meals. But it was not an unfriendly silence. It was simply the silence of a man who had lived alone for a long time and had grown used to the texture of his own company. Rebecca was comfortable with that. She had her own quiet after all. But occasionally, just occasionally, she would look up from her work and find him watching her from across the room. Not in a strange way. More like the way a person looks when something has snagged gently on a thought and they haven't yet worked out what the thought is. Each time it happened he would look away immediately. And so would she. Neither of them mentioned it. It was on a Thursday morning in the second week that it happened. Rebecca was cleaning the study. Mr. Caleb had gone out, one of the rare mornings when he had an early meeting at the office, and the house was entirely quiet in the peaceful way it only ever was when he wasn't in it. She worked her way around the room carefully. She dusted the bookshelves, replacing each book exactly as she found it. She wiped down the desk, moving around his papers without touching them. She cleaned the window in long strokes from top to bottom. Then she turned to the wall of photographs. She cleaned the frames one by one, lifting each gently, wiping the glass, setting it back. There was the large formal one of Mr. Caleb shaking hands with someone in front of a completed building. There was a group photograph of several men in suits at what looked like an office celebration. Then she lifted the next one. It was smaller than the others. A simple black frame. It showed a young man, maybe in his late 20s or early 30s, standing outside somewhere looking directly at the camera. He was lean, sharp-eyed, serious even then. Not yet the polished businessman with the silver hair and the pressed white shirts. Just a young man at the beginning of something. Rebecca looked at the photograph. She wasn't sure how long she stood there. It couldn't have been more than a few seconds. But something about it held her in a way she couldn't explain. A strange, quiet pull, like hearing a piece of music that feels familiar even though you are certain you have never heard it before. There was nothing unusual about the photograph. It was simply a young Mr. Caleb. Her employer. A man she had known for 2 weeks. And yet. She set the frame back on the wall, exactly where it had been, and stood looking at it for one more moment. Then she shook her head slightly, picked up her cloth and moved on. She told herself it was nothing. She had no reason not to believe herself. The following Saturday, everything changed, though not in any way Rebecca could see coming. She was in the kitchen just after 11 in the morning washing the breakfast things, when she heard a car pull into the driveway. Not Mr. Caleb's car, a different engine, louder and less smooth. Then a car door slamming. Then a voice, large and cheerful, coming from outside. Caleb. Come out here, man. I didn't come all this way to ring a bell. Rebecca heard Mr. Caleb's study chair push back. She heard his footsteps, unhurried as always, move down the hallway toward the front door. Then came the sound of the door opening and 2 men greeting each other the way old friends do, not with formality, but with something loud and warm and slightly messy that Mr. Caleb's house didn't usually contain. Benjamin, she heard Mr. Caleb say. And even in that single word, spoken in his usual even tone, there was something different. Something looser. She dried her hands on a towel and went to find out if she was needed. Benjamin was nothing like Mr. Caleb. Where Mr. Caleb was contained, Benjamin overflowed. He was a big man, broad shoulders, wide smile, the kind of laugh that came from the belly and had no interest in being quiet. He was wearing a bright, open-collared shirt and carrying a leather travel bag that he dropped in the middle of the hallway without a second thought. He had the easy, comfortable energy of someone who had spent many years moving between countries and had stopped being surprised by anything. He and Mr. Caleb were standing in the hallway when Rebecca came around the corner from the kitchen, a small tray in her hands. "Sir," she said, looking at Mr. Caleb, "would your guest like something to drink?" Benjamin turned. And he stopped. Not dramatically. Not the way people stop in movies with wide eyes and sharp breath. Just a pause. Brief and quiet. His smile stayed on his face, but something behind it shifted, the way a light flickers once and then steadies. He looked at Rebecca. His eyes moved across her face slowly, the way you look at something when your brain is doing a calculation it hasn't told you about yet. Her eyes. Her cheekbones. The shape of her jaw. The way she held herself. The smile came back fully. He shook his head almost imperceptibly, as if answering a question only he had heard, and turned back to Mr. Caleb. "Water is fine," he said. "Thank you." Rebecca nodded and went back to the kitchen. Behind her, she heard Benjamin say something quietly to Mr. Caleb. She couldn't make out the words. Then she heard Mr. Caleb say, "She started last week. Grace recommended her," and Benjamin gave a short sound, half laugh, half something else, that she couldn't read at all. She filled 2 glasses of water and carried them back out on the tray. Neither man was looking at her strangely when she returned. Benjamin was already talking about his flight, waving his hand, launching into a story about the airport. Mr. Caleb was listening with the particular expression he used when he was being patient. Rebecca set the glasses down and left them to it. Benjamin stayed for lunch. Rebecca prepared it, grilled fish, rice, a simple salad, and served it in the dining room. As she moved back and forth from the kitchen, she caught small pieces of their conversation drifting through the doorway. Old names. Old places. The way people talk when they are reaching back into a shared past and pulling out memories to examine. She paid it no particular attention. It wasn't her conversation to listen to. But then she heard Benjamin's voice drop into a different register. Lower, warmer, the way a voice goes when it is getting close to something real. "Do you remember those days, Caleb? That last year of school?" She was in the kitchen, covering a dish. She was not listening. "Some of it," Mr. Caleb said. "Some of it." Benjamin laughed. "You always say that. You remember all of it. You just don't like to say so." Pause. "Victoria," Benjamin said. The name came through the doorway clearly. Casually. The way you drop a stone into still water without expecting much. Rebecca set down the dish cover. She wasn't sure why that name made her hands go still. She told herself it was a common name. It meant nothing. She stayed where she was and did not move. "Benjamin," she heard Mr. Caleb say. His voice was quiet and careful. A warning almost. But Benjamin was already moving forward the way old friends do. The ones who earned the right long ago to say things that others would not dare. "I'm just saying," Benjamin said, with a smile in his voice that Rebecca could hear even from the kitchen. "She was a good girl, Victoria. She deserved better from you, my friend. We both know that." He chuckled. "Running away when she told you she was pregnant. Honestly, Caleb, I was ashamed of you." A silence. The kind that has weight to it. "That was a long time ago," Mr. Caleb said. His voice had gone very flat. Very still. 30 years, Benjamin agreed. "Exactly." He paused as if considering whether to say the next thing. Then, "You know what's strange? That girl out there, your new maid." Another pause. "She looks like her. Victoria. Around the eyes especially. I noticed it the moment she came around the corner." He laughed softly as if to soften the edge of his own words. "Probably just my imagination working too hard. I've been traveling, I'm tired. Ignore me." Mr. Caleb said nothing. "Ignore me," Benjamin said again, lighter this time. "Pass the salt." In the kitchen, Rebecca stood very still. The dish cover was in her hands. The afternoon sun was coming through the window. The clock above the shelf was ticking. "Victoria. She looks like her." She breathed out slowly through her nose, set the dish cover down, and picked up the water jug that needed refilling. She had a job to do. She would do her job. She walked back into the dining room with the water jug and refilled both glasses with a steady hand and a calm face, and neither man could have known that their conversation had just landed somewhere inside her like a seed falling into soil, quietly, without fanfare, not yet ready to grow. That night, long after Benjamin had said his warm goodbyes and driven away in his loud car, Mr. Caleb sat alone in his study. He had not turned on the main light. Just the small lamp on the corner of his desk, which threw a warm circle onto the papers in front of him. He was not reading the papers. He was sitting back in his chair with his hands folded in his lap and his eyes looking at something that was not in the room. She looks like her. Victoria. Around the eyes especially. He hadn't thought about Victoria in, he couldn't even say how long. Years. Many years. He had been very deliberate about not thinking about her. He was a disciplined man. When he decided not to think about something, he did not think about it. But Benjamin's words had slipped past all that discipline the way smoke slips under a closed door. There was nothing to grab onto and push back. They were just words, casually said by an old friend who had probably already forgotten he said them. And yet here he was, sitting in the dark with the lamp on, not reading. He thought about a girl with warm eyes and hair tied up loosely, in a garden somewhere, laughing. He thought about the day she had come to him, nervous, very young, speaking quietly, and what she had told him. He thought about what he had said back. He pressed the tips of his fingers against his forehead and closed his eyes. He had been 29 years old. He had been afraid. He had been building something, just starting to build something, and a child had felt like the end of everything he was trying to create. That was what he had told himself. That was how he had explained it then. It sounded different now. Sitting in a quiet house at 61 years old, in a room full of everything money had ever bought him. He opened his eyes. Through the study doorway the hallway was dark. The house was silent. Rebecca had long gone home. He thought about her face. Stop it, he told himself. He turned back to his papers. But sleep, when it finally came that night, was a long time in arriving. He woke at 2 in the morning. Not slowly, the way you sometimes drift out of sleep, but suddenly, completely, as if something had reached into his chest and pulled him upright. He lay in the dark for a moment, staring at the ceiling, and knew immediately that sleep was not coming back. He got up. He didn't turn on any lights. He knew this house well enough to move through it in the dark. Every doorway, every step, every corner. He went to the kitchen and filled a glass of water and drank it standing at the sink, looking out at the back garden where the mango tree was just a dark shape against a dark sky. Benjamin's voice kept coming back to him. She looks like her. Victoria. Around the eyes especially. He set the glass down. He told himself again that it was nothing. Rebecca was a young woman who happened to have a face that reminded a tired, jet-lagged man of someone from 30 years ago. Benjamin had always had a flair for the dramatic. It was nothing. He went back to bed. He lay there for 20 minutes looking at the ceiling. Then he got up again. The storage room was at the far end of the upstairs hallway, a narrow room that he used for old files and things he didn't need often enough to keep in the study but couldn't quite bring himself to throw away. He hadn't been inside it in at least a year. Maybe longer. He turned on the single bare bulb that hung from the ceiling and looked at the shelves. He wasn't entirely sure what he was looking for. He told himself he wasn't looking for anything, just moving, just doing something with his hands and his body so his mind would quiet down. He pulled out an old folder, looked at it, put it back. He shifted a box of archived contracts. He moved a stack of old magazines he kept meaning to sort through. And then, on the bottom shelf, pushed to the back behind everything else, he saw it. A cardboard box. Brown, slightly soft at the corners from age. No label on the outside. He looked at it for a long moment. He knew what was in it. Somewhere at the back of his mind, beneath all the years of deliberate forgetting, he had always known exactly where it was. He crouched down and pulled it out. It was dusty. He wiped the top with his hand, leaving a gray smear across his palm. He carried it out of the storage room and down the hallway to his study, where he set it on the desk under the lamp and sat down. He did not open it immediately. He sat with his hands resting on either side of it and looked at the dull brown cardboard and breathed slowly. He was 61 years old. He had built a company. He had made difficult decisions, managed crises, signed documents that changed the shapes of entire neighborhoods. He was not a man who was frightened of boxes. He lifted the flaps. Inside, under a thin layer of dust, the past was exactly where he had left it. A school report from his final year, he didn't know why he had kept it. A folded program from a graduation ceremony. A small leather notebook with a broken clasp that had once been his diary, he didn't open that. A few loose photographs. He took out the photographs. Most of them he recognized without feeling much. Groups of young people he had largely lost touch with. A birthday party somewhere. A trip to the coast with a crowd of school friends, everyone squinting into the sun. Then one that made him stop. 3 teenagers in a school courtyard. He recognized it immediately, the old concrete wall behind them, the way the afternoon light came in at that angle. He was in the middle. Benjamin on his left with his arm thrown over his shoulder. And on his right, slightly turned toward them, laughing at something. Victoria. He sat very still. He had not seen her face in 30 years. Not in a photograph, not in a dream, not in anything. He had been that thorough about it. She looked so young. They all did, absurdly young, the way you can only see in retrospect when you are old enough to know that 16 is just the beginning of everything and feels like the whole world at the time. Her hair was tied up loosely, strands escaping at the sides. She was laughing with her whole face the way some people do, nothing held back, nothing controlled. He remembered that laugh. He put the photograph face down on the desk without knowing he was going to do it. He looked back at the box. There were a few folded letters at the bottom. Old ones. The paper had gone slightly yellow at the edges, the way paper does when it has been kept too long in a box that isn't quite airtight. He took them out one by one. 2 were from Benjamin, written during a summer when Benjamin had gone to visit relatives in another city. Jokey, rambling letters full of observations about people he had met and food he had eaten. He set those aside. The last one was different. The envelope was smaller. The handwriting on the front, just his name, Simon, was careful and neat, the letters slightly pressed into the paper as if written by someone who had thought about each one before putting it down. He knew the handwriting. He sat there holding the envelope for a long time. He could not have said how long. The lamp threw its small circle of light on the desk. The house was completely silent. Outside, somewhere far away, a night bird called once and then was quiet. He opened it. The letter was 2 pages long. He read it slowly. Then he read it again. The words were simple. She had always written simply, clearly, without decoration. That had been one of the things about her. She said what she meant. She wrote that she was leaving. That she had waited as long as she could. That she had hoped he would come back or change his mind or at least answer her calls, but that she understood now that he wasn't going to. She was not angry in the letter, or if she was, she had taken that part out. She was mostly just sad, in the quiet way that is worse than anger because it has given up expecting anything different. And then, near the bottom of the first page, the words that now sat on his chest like something heavy and permanent. I want you to know that I am keeping the baby. I know you said what you said. I know you don't want this. But this child is not nothing to me, Simon, and I will not pretend otherwise. I'm going to raise this child alone if I have to. And I will be enough. I will make myself enough. He turned to the second page. I'm not writing this to make you feel guilty. I'm writing it because one day when enough time has passed, I think the guilt will find you on its own. And when it does, I want you to know that I did not raise our child to hate you. I raised our child to be better than the fear that made you run away. Victoria. He set the letter down. He sat in his chair, under the small lamp, in the large silent house, and did not move for a very long time. Our child. Not a possibility. Not a maybe. She had kept the baby. She had said it plainly, I am keeping the baby. Which meant somewhere, at some point in the last 30 years, a child had been born. His child. And he had never looked. Not once. Not a single time in 30 years had he picked up a phone or knocked on a door or even let himself wonder properly, because wondering properly would have meant having to live with the answer. He pressed both hands flat on the desk and looked at the letter. I raised our child to be better than the fear that made you run away. He thought about a young woman who arrived 5 minutes early on her first day of work. Who moved through his house with quiet, careful dignity. Who said I can work with particular and looked him in the eye when she said it. Who had a face that an old friend, a tired, jet-lagged old friend, had looked at across a hallway and said, without even meaning to, she looks like Victoria. He thought about the feeling he had felt the first time their eyes met. That strange, familiar squeeze in his chest. That sensation of recognizing something without knowing what it was. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the lamp was still burning and the letter was still there, and outside the window the sky had shifted, almost imperceptibly but shifted, from the black of full night to the very deep blue that comes just before morning begins. He had been sitting there for hours. He folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. He did not put it back in the box. He left it on the desk in the circle of lamplight, and went to stand at the window. The garden was dark and still. The mango tree was a shadow. And somewhere across the city, in a small 4th-floor apartment that he had never been to and could not picture, A young woman was sleeping. A young woman who came to his house every morning, who made his breakfast, who had his eyes without knowing it. Or so he feared. Or so, somewhere in the part of him that had been avoiding this moment for 30 years, he was beginning, slowly, terribly, to know. Morning came whether he was ready for it or not. It always did. Mr. Caleb showered, dressed, and went downstairs at his usual time. He made his own coffee, something he rarely did, but he needed something to do with his hands before Rebecca arrived. He stood at the kitchen counter and drank it slowly, looking at nothing in particular. He had put the box back in the storage room before the sun came up. He had put the letter back in the envelope in the box and the box on the bottom shelf where it had always been. He had turned off the lamp in his study and straightened the chair and made everything look exactly as it always looked. But the letter was still inside him. The words were still sitting there, heavy and permanent, the way words do when they have been waiting 30 years to be read. I raised our child to be better than the fear that made you run away. He heard the gate bell at 6:55. He set down his coffee cup. He straightened his shirt. He walked to the front door and opened it. Rebecca was standing on the path in the morning light, her bag over her shoulder, her face calm and unhurried. She looked at him and said, "Good morning, sir," exactly the way she said it every morning. He looked at her face. He looked at her eyes. He said, "Good morning, Rebecca," and stepped aside to let her in and went back to his study and closed the door. He tried to work. He opened his laptop and read 3 emails and understood none of them. He picked up a report and read the same paragraph 4 times. He put it down. He picked up his pen, held it, put it down. Through the closed study door, he could hear the quiet sounds of the house beginning its day. The kettle. The soft click of cabinet doors. Footsteps, light and measured, moving between the kitchen and the dining room. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of every morning for the past 2 weeks. He pressed his fingers against his temples and stared at his desk. He needed to be sure. That was the thing. He was a man who had built his entire life on certainty, on facts, figures, documents, proof. He did not make decisions based on feelings and old letters and the observations of a jet-lagged friend. He made decisions based on evidence. He needed evidence. But how do you ask a person something like that? How do you sit across from someone who makes your breakfast every morning and say, "What, exactly?" He didn't know yet. He let the morning pass. Rebecca, for her part, was having a perfectly ordinary morning. She had noticed that Mr. Caleb's door was closed, which sometimes happened when he had a lot of work, so she left him to it. She cleaned the sitting room, dusted the hallway, tidied the kitchen after breakfast. She watered the plant in the corner of the sitting room the way Grace's folder had instructed. Not too much, just enough to dampen the soil. She was calm. She moved through the house the way she always moved through it, quietly, carefully, without rushing. But the word she had heard through the dining room doorway 2 days ago was still with her, in the way that certain things lodge themselves in the back of your mind and stay there no matter how many ordinary tasks you pile on top of them. Victoria. She hadn't told anyone. There was no one to tell. And besides, she wasn't sure what she would say. I heard my employer's old friend mention my mother's name at lunch. It wasn't strange. Victoria was not an unusual name. It meant nothing. She went about her work. At 10:30, she was in the upstairs hallway, changing the towels in the bathroom, when she noticed that the storage room door at the end of the hall was open. She hadn't opened it. She had never been inside it. Grace's folder had said the storage room was Mr. Caleb's private space and was not part of the regular cleaning unless he specifically asked. But the door was standing slightly open, and something had shifted on the bottom shelf. She could see from the doorway that a box had been moved, pulled forward from the back and then pushed back not quite as far as it had been. She could see the gap it had left in the dust on the shelf. She looked at it for a moment. She would not go in. It wasn't her space. She reached in and pulled the door shut with one finger and went back to the towels. She was halfway down the stairs when she stopped. She didn't know why she stopped. There was no sound, no movement, nothing that should have made her pause. She simply stopped on the 5th step from the top, her hand on the railing, and looked down at the hallway below. The study door was still closed. On the wall opposite the foot of the stairs, the row of framed photographs caught the mid-morning light. She could see them from here. The formal group photograph, the one of him in front of his building, the smaller black-framed one of the young Mr. Caleb that had held her attention that Thursday morning. She came down the rest of the stairs. She told herself she was going back to the kitchen. She was going to start preparing lunch. That was the next thing on her morning. She stopped in front of the photographs. She looked at the small black frame. The young man with the sharp eyes and the serious face, looking directly at the camera. She still couldn't explain it, that feeling. She had tried, in the quiet moments of the past 2 weeks, to put a name to it. The closest she could get was this. It was like looking at a place you have never been and feeling for one strange second that you have. Not a memory. Something older than a memory. Something that lives in the body rather than the mind. She looked at the photo for a long moment. And then, without entirely planning to, she turned and walked to the study door and knocked. "Sir? Come in." She opened the door. He was at his desk, but his laptop was closed and he was not reading anything. He was just sitting there, in a way that was unusual for him, hands in his lap, looking at the desk surface. "I'm about to start lunch," she said. "I wanted to ask if Mr. Benjamin is joining you today, so I know how much to prepare." "No," Mr. Caleb said. "Just me." "Yes, sir." She was about to close the door when he spoke again. "Rebecca." She paused. "I need to take care of something this week," he said carefully. He was looking at the desk as he spoke. "I have been meaning to finalize the paperwork for your employment properly, contract, emergency contact, the usual things the company requires for household staff." He looked up then. His eyes met hers. "I'll need you to bring your official documents. Birth certificate, any identification you have. Can you do that by Thursday?" There was nothing strange about the request. It was a completely normal thing for an employer to ask. "Of course, sir," Rebecca said. "I'll bring them Thursday." He nodded. "Thank you." She pulled the door closed behind her. She went to the kitchen and began taking things out for lunch, her hands moving through their familiar routine. Pot on the stove, water on to heat, vegetables on the board. Her birth certificate. She kept it in an envelope in the small drawer of her bedside table, with her other important documents. She knew exactly what it said. She had read it many times over the years, not because she needed to, but because it was one of the few official records of her mother's existence that she had. One of the few places where her mother's full name appeared in clean, formal print. Mother, Victoria and Lawson. Father, unknown. She stood at the kitchen counter and stared at the pot of water coming slowly to the boil. Unknown. That was the word that had sat in that small box on the form all her life. A box her mother had left empty, whether out of bitterness or protection or simple resignation. Rebecca had never been entirely sure. Unknown. She picked up the knife and began cutting the vegetables. Her face was calm. Her hands were steady. But something was moving in her. Something quiet and underground, the way water moves beneath a dry field long before it ever breaks the surface. She did not know yet what it was. She only knew that Thursday felt suddenly closer than it had before. Tuesday passed. Then Wednesday. The house kept its rhythm. Mr. Caleb worked. Rebecca cleaned, cooked, moved quietly through the rooms. They exchanged the usual words. "Good morning, lunch is ready, thank you, good night." Everything on the surface was exactly as it had always been. But something beneath the surface had shifted. Rebecca could feel it, though she couldn't have said precisely what it was. A change in the air, maybe. The way Mr. Caleb sometimes paused a half-second too long before answering her. The way he occasionally looked up from whatever he was doing when she entered a room, not sharply, not suspiciously, just looked. As if checking something. As if confirming something to himself. She noticed it the way she noticed everything, quietly without reacting. She stored it in the back of her mind and kept working. On Wednesday evening on the bus home, she took out her phone and looked at nothing for a while. Then she put it away and looked out the window instead. She thought about Thursday. She thought about the envelope in her bedside drawer. That night she sat on her bed and took the documents out. She kept them in a brown envelope that she had sealed and resealed so many times the flap no longer stuck properly. Inside were 4 things: her national identity card, her school leaving certificate, her bank card, and at the very bottom, folded once along the middle, her birth certificate. She unfolded it on her lap. It was the original, slightly worn at the fold, the print faded in one corner where water had touched it once many years ago. She had been careful with it ever since. She read it the way she had read it 100 times before. Her full name. Her date of birth. The hospital where she had been born. Her mother's name, printed in clean official letters. Mother, Victoria and Lawson. And beside the line that read father, that small, blank, unhelpful word. Unknown. She sat with it in her lap for a long time, listening to the sounds of the building around her. A television 2 floors up. Someone's baby crying briefly and then stopping. The lift grinding into action somewhere and then going quiet. She thought about what her mother had said. He knew. He chose not to stay. If he knew, if he had been told, then he had a name. He existed somewhere. He was not unknown in the true sense of the word. He was only unknown on paper because her mother had chosen not to write him in. Rebecca had always understood that choice. Her mother had been protecting something, protecting her, maybe from the particular pain of having a father's name on a document but not in her life. A name without a presence. A box filled in but hollow. She folded the birth certificate carefully along its crease and put it back in the envelope. She put the envelope in her bag ready for the morning. Then she turned off her light and lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and tried, without much success, to sleep. Thursday arrived cool and overcast, the sky the color of old cotton, a light wind moving through the palm trees on Mr. Caleb Street as Rebecca walked from the bus stop to the gate. She pressed the bell. The gate opened. Mr. Caleb was already in his study when she came in. His door was open this morning, which was slightly unusual. She could see him at his desk from the hallway, reading something, glasses on, coffee beside him. "Good morning, sir," she said, pausing at the doorway. He looked up. "Good morning." A brief pause. "You remembered the documents?" "Yes, sir. I have them." He nodded. "Leave them on the kitchen table for now. I'll look at them after breakfast." She went to the kitchen and set the brown envelope on the table. She looked at it sitting there on the clean surface, small and ordinary the way important things often look from the outside. Then she put the kettle on and started his breakfast. She served his eggs at 7:30 as always. She went back to the kitchen and cleaned up, and then began the morning's work, sweeping the hallway, wiping down the sitting room, straightening the cushions on the chairs. At around 9:30, Mr. Caleb came out of his study. She heard him go to the kitchen. She heard the sound of the envelope being picked up. She kept sweeping. She swept the same patch of floor twice without noticing. Mr. Caleb sat at the kitchen table with the envelope. He opened it carefully the way he opened everything, without tearing, without rushing. He took out the documents one by one and set them on the table. Identity card. School certificate. Bank card. And then the birth certificate. He unfolded it. He read it. His eyes moved down the page slowly, steadily, the way they moved down contracts and project reports and documents of all kinds. Trained eyes. Patient eyes. And then they stopped. Mother, Victoria and Lawson. He did not move. The kitchen was very quiet. Through the window, the overcast sky gave a flat, even light that made everything look very clear and very still. Victoria and Lawson. Not a common name. Not a name that could be confused with another. He had known a Victoria and Lawson. 30 years ago. A girl with warm eyes and hair tied loosely and a laugh that held nothing back. A girl who had come to him one afternoon, nervous and young and certain, and told him something that he had been too afraid to receive. A girl who had written him a letter he had not read for 3 decades. "I'm keeping the baby." He set the birth certificate down flat on the table with both hands and looked at it. His own name was not on it. The father line was blank, marked with that single, insufficient word. But that word, he now understood, was not the truth. It was simply what happened when a man ran away and a woman was left to fill in the forms alone. He had run away. He sat in his kitchen at 61 years old, in the house he had filled with order and control and the evidence of everything he had achieved, and he felt something he had spent 3 decades carefully avoiding. He felt exactly what Victoria had predicted he would feel. The guilt will find you on its own. He put the documents back in the envelope gently, the way you handle something that belongs to someone else. He straightened them so they sat neatly inside. He set it on the table. Then he got up, walked to the kitchen doorway and looked down the hall. Rebecca was in the sitting room. He could see her through the open door, standing at the bookshelf, dusting the shelves in her careful, methodical way, working from left to right, lifting each book slightly and wiping beneath it. He watched her for a moment. The shape of her face in the flat morning light. The way she held herself, straight, quiet, completely focused on what was in front of her. Not performing. Not aware of being watched. Just herself. Fully and simply herself. He pressed his hand against the doorframe. He had looked at this young woman every day for nearly 3 weeks. He had felt from the very first moment something he could not name. And he had pushed it away the same way he had pushed everything away that threatened the order of his world. But the birth certificate was on his kitchen table. And Victoria's handwriting was in a letter he could not unread. And the young woman dusting his bookshelves was, he knew it now, in that way that is beyond proof, beyond documents, beyond anything that can be argued with. She was his daughter, who did not know it yet, who came to his house every morning and made his breakfast and said good morning, sir, and had no idea that the man she was working for was the same man her mother had once written a letter to from a place of quiet, dignified heartbreak. He pushed off from the doorframe and went back to his study. He needed to think. He needed to be very careful about what came next. Rebecca finished the sitting room and moved to the study. The door was open, but Mr. Caleb was not inside. She had heard him go upstairs a few minutes ago, which meant she had time to clean the room properly. She came in, set her cleaning supplies on the floor and began. She dusted the bookshelves. She wiped the window. She cleaned the surface of the desk in long, careful strokes, moving around the closed laptop and the neat stack of papers. Then she turned to the wall of photographs. She had cleaned these frames before, 2 weeks ago on her first Thursday. She worked along the row, lifting each frame, wiping the glass, replacing it exactly. She reached the photograph of the 3 teenagers. She lifted it off the wall. She wiped the glass. She was about to put it back when her eye caught the writing on the side of the frame, not on the back as she had thought before, but along the inner edge where the photograph had slipped very slightly to one side inside the frame, revealing a small strip of the back of the photograph. Faded pencil. 3 names in a line. She tilted the frame to read them. Benjamin. Simon. Victoria. She went very still. She looked at the photograph through the clean glass. The girl on the right. Slightly turned, laughing, hair loosely tied. Rebecca looked at that face. And the world became very, very quiet. She had grown up looking at her mother's face. She had a photograph of her own. Smaller, different, her mother older in it than this. But the face was the same face. The eyes. The cheekbones. The way the smile reached all the way up. Victoria. Her mother's name, written in pencil on the back of a photograph hanging on the wall of the house where she worked. Her mother, young and laughing and alive, standing between 2 boys. One of whom was called Simon. And the other, the one in the middle, straight-backed, self-contained even then. She looked at the boy in the middle. She looked at his jaw. His eyes. The way he stood. She looked up at the room around her. The desk. The bookshelves. The chair. The house she had come to know over 3 weeks. The man she saw every morning. The man whose face she had looked at in that black-framed photograph on the wall and felt that pull she couldn't explain. The man named Caleb. Whose first name she had never thought to ask. Whose first name Grace had mentioned to her, exactly once, months ago, in the easy way that people mention things that seem unimportant. Oh, his name is Simon. Simon Caleb. But everyone calls him Mr. Caleb. She hadn't remembered it until this moment. Simon. She looked at the photograph in her hands. Benjamin. Simon. Victoria. Her mother. Her mother's name. Right there, in this house, on this wall, inside this frame that she had dusted and replaced and never truly looked at until now. She put the photograph back on the wall very carefully. She made sure it was level. She made sure it was exactly where it had been. She picked up her cleaning things. She walked out of the study and down the hallway to the kitchen and stood at the sink and turned on the cold tap and held her wrists under the running water for a moment, the way she sometimes did when she needed to feel something simple and real. The water was cold. The tap was real. The kitchen was real. And the photograph on the wall down the hall was real. She turned off the tap. She dried her hands. She looked out the window at the overcast sky. Somewhere upstairs, she could hear Mr. Caleb's footsteps moving slowly back and forth. She finished her work that day the way a person finishes something when their hands know what to do but their mind is somewhere else entirely. She swept. She mopped. She prepared lunch and set it on the table at 1 o'clock and said, "Lunch is ready, sir," through the study door in a voice that sounded, to her own ears, remarkably normal. She washed the lunch dishes. She wiped down the counters. And all the while, underneath all of it, the same thing kept turning over and over in her mind like a stone in water. Simon. Benjamin. Victoria. She was not a person who panicked. She had learned that a long time ago. That panic was a luxury that people without safety nets could not really afford. When her mother got sick, she hadn't panicked. When her mother died, she had cried privately and then stood up and figured out what came next. When jobs ended and money ran short and the world proved itself once again to be indifferent, she had simply steadied herself and taken the next step forward. But this was different from all of those things. Those had been losses. Things taken away. This was something else, something arriving. Something enormous coming toward her from a direction she had never thought to look. She needed to be sure. One name in a photograph proved nothing by itself. Her mother's name was not the rarest name in the world. People had the same names all the time. And the boy in the middle of that photograph, the one called Simon, she was reading his face through the lens of everything she already feared, and she knew that was not a reliable way to look at anything. She needed to be sure. That evening, after she had said goodnight and the gate had closed behind her, she walked to the bus stop at a slower pace than usual. The overcast sky had cleared during the afternoon and now the evening was clean and pale, the sun going down somewhere behind the buildings in long orange stripes. People moved around her on the pavement, heading home, carrying things, talking into their phones. The ordinary world, doing its ordinary things, completely unaware that a young woman was walking through it with something enormous sitting quietly in the center of her chest. She sat on the bus and thought. She was good at thinking carefully. It was one of the things she had trained herself to do, not to react immediately, not to say the first thing that came to her, but to sit with something until she understood its shape. So, what did she actually know? She knew that her mother's name was Victoria. She knew that her mother had been in a relationship, when she was young, with a man named Simon. She knew that this man had left when her mother became pregnant. She knew that her mother had raised her alone and had died when she was 16 without ever telling her the full story. She knew that her employer's name was Simon Caleb. That he was the right age, old enough to have been young 30 years ago. That there was a photograph in his study showing a young man named Simon alongside a young woman named Victoria who had the same face as her mother. She knew that when she had first walked through his front door 3 weeks ago, something had tightened in her chest that she had not been able to explain. She knew that he had asked for her birth certificate. That he had been alone with it in the kitchen for a long time this morning. She knew that when he had come out of his study after reading it, he had been very quiet. Quieter than usual. A different kind of quiet, not his usual contained, working silence, but something heavier. Something that sat behind his eyes differently. She pressed her forehead lightly against the cool glass of the bus window. These were things she knew. What she did not know was what to do with them. She did not sleep well that night. She lay in the dark and listened to the building's sounds, the television, the plumbing, the occasional footstep above her, and let herself, for the first time, ask the question out loud in her own mind. Is he my father? And underneath that question, barely a breath behind it, another one. If he is, what then? She thought about her mother. About the way Victoria had said his name, Simon, once, quietly with her eyes on the floor. About the letter she must have written. About the years she had worked at a small table by a window, needle moving fast and steady, raising a daughter alone and never complaining about it, never making Rebecca feel like a burden, never letting the absence of a father become the loudest thing in the room. Her mother had protected her from so much. But she hadn't been able to protect her from the wondering. Rebecca looked at the dark ceiling and felt something she rarely let herself feel, a slow, rising anger. Not a loud anger. Just a deep, quiet heat. The kind that has been kept very carefully banked for years and has never quite gone out. She thought about Father's Day. Every year without fail. The banners in the shops, the cards in the windows, the pastor asking fathers to stand. She had sat in those pews as a child and looked at the floor and told herself it didn't matter. She thought about the school drawing, herself and her mother and the empty space beside them that she hadn't known how to fill. She thought about every time someone had asked casually the way children do, "Where's your dad?" And she had learned over time to shrug it off so smoothly that people stopped asking. She had told herself all her life that she was fine. That she had been enough, her mother had been enough, that the absence of a father was simply the shape of her particular life and she had made peace with it. She wondered now, staring at the dark ceiling, how much of that had been true and how much of it had been something she told herself because the alternative, the real feeling, the full size of it, was simply too large to carry and still get up in the morning. She turned onto her side. On the shelf across the room, her mother's photograph was just a dark rectangle in the darkness. She couldn't see it, but she knew it was there. I raised our child to be better than the fear that made you run away. She didn't know those words. She had never seen the letter. But somewhere without knowing it, she had been shaped by them all her life. She closed her eyes. She would go to work tomorrow. She would be calm. She would do her job. And she would watch. And she would think. And when she was sure, truly sure, she would decide what to do. Friday morning was bright and clear, the kind of morning that seems almost unreasonably cheerful when your mind is heavy. Rebecca arrived at 6:55 as always. She let herself in through the gate. Mr. Caleb had given her a key at the end of her first week, and went to the kitchen to start the morning. She moved through her routine. Kettle on. Breakfast prepared. Table set. Everything in its right place. She was cracking the eggs when she heard Mr. Caleb come downstairs. His tread on the stairs was familiar to her now. She could tell the difference between his morning steps and his midday steps. Between the pace he used when he was going somewhere with purpose and the slightly slower one he used when something was on his mind. This morning his steps were slow. He came into the kitchen doorway and stopped. This was unusual. He never came to the kitchen in the mornings. She brought breakfast to him, that was the arrangement. She looked up from the pan. He was standing in the doorway in his white shirt and gray trousers, and he was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not cold, not warm, something in between. Something careful and stripped of its usual control, the way a wall looks after the paint has been taken off, still standing but more honest. "Good morning, sir," she said. "Good morning." He did not move from the doorway. "Rebecca, are you free this evening? After you finish your work here?" She kept her face still. "Yes, sir. I'd like you to stay a little later today if that's possible. I need to talk to you about something." He paused. "Not about the job." The egg was beginning to cook in the pan. She kept her eyes on it, giving it the attention it needed. "Of course," she said calmly. "What time would you like?" "After dinner. Around 7. I'll be here." He nodded and went back down the hallway to his study. Rebecca stood at the stove and watched the egg. Not about the job. Her heart was beating at a slightly different pace than usual. She noticed it the way you notice a clock that has started ticking louder, not alarming, just present. Impossible to ignore. She finished making his breakfast. She carried it to the table. She set it down without a sound. The day moved slowly. She did her work thoroughly, the way she always did, but the hours felt longer than usual, each one arriving and passing with deliberate patience, as if time itself had decided not to hurry today. Mr. Caleb worked in his study all morning. At lunch he came to the table and ate quietly and went back. She heard him on the phone once in the afternoon, speaking in his clipped professional voice about something to do with a building permit. Normal things. Ordinary things. But twice, when she passed the study doorway on her way down the hall, she caught him not working. Just sitting. Hands folded. Looking somewhere that wasn't the room. She made dinner at 6, rice, grilled chicken, a small salad, and served it at the usual time. He ate. She cleared. She washed the dishes and dried them and put them back in their places. Then she sat at the small kitchen table and waited. She heard his chair move. His footsteps in the hallway. The soft sound of the sitting room light being turned on. "Rebecca." She stood up, smoothed her top, and walked to the sitting room. He was standing by the window rather than sitting in his usual chair. The evening light was going now, the sky outside deep orange at the bottom, fading to blue at the top. The room was warm and quiet. He turned when she came in. He gestured to the chairs. "Please sit down." She sat. He remained standing for a moment longer, looking at the floor. Then he sat too, on the edge of his chair, leaning forward slightly, his hands loosely clasped together. He looked at her. And she looked at him. And for a long moment neither of them spoke. Because some moments need a little space before the words come. Because what was about to happen had been 30 years in the making and deserved, at minimum, a breath. And then Mr. Caleb opened his mouth. "I want to ask you something," Mr. Caleb said. "And I want you to know that whatever your answer is, your job here is not affected. That is not what this is about." Rebecca said nothing. She waited. He looked down at his hands for a moment, then back up at her. "Your mother's name was Victoria and Lawson." It was not a question. He had read it on the birth certificate. He already knew. But he said it carefully, the way you say something when you need to hear it out loud in a room, when you need the air to hold it. "Yes," Rebecca said. Her voice was level. Quiet. He nodded slowly. He pressed his lips together and looked at the window for a moment, at the deep orange sky going dark, and then back at her. "I knew a Victoria and Lawson," he said. "A long time ago. We were young." He paused. "I was young and I was foolish and I did something that I have never fully allowed myself to think about until very recently." The room was very still. Rebecca's hands were in her lap. She had not moved since she sat down. She was watching his face with the particular stillness of someone who has been waiting for something for a very long time and is now afraid that moving even slightly might make it stop. "She told me she was pregnant," Mr. Caleb said. The words came out flat and plain, without decoration, the way a man says something when he is done protecting himself from it. "And he stopped. Breathed. Started again. "I denied it. I told her it wasn't my problem. I told her." He stopped again. His jaw tightened. "I told her I had plans. That I was going somewhere. That I couldn't let anything get in the way of that." He said it all looking directly at her. He did not look away. Whatever he was feeling, he did not use the window or the floor to hide from it. "And then I left," he said simply. "I moved to another part of the city. I changed my number. I built my company. I built all of—" He made a small gesture with one hand that seemed to take in the whole house, all of it, the paintings and the bookshelves and the leather chairs and the neat garden outside, all of this. "And I told myself that what I had done was something that happened to young men who were not yet ready. A mistake. Something that time would cover over. He was quiet. Outside, the last of the orange light disappeared from the sky. "She wrote me a letter," he said. "Before she left. I found it last week in a box I hadn't opened in 30 years. He looked at Rebecca. "In that letter she told me she was keeping the baby. That she would raise the child alone. That she would make herself enough." Rebecca felt something move through her, a wave of something warm and painful at the same time. Her mother's words, spoken in this man's voice in this room. She had not known about the letter. But she recognized it. She recognized the voice of it, the quiet, dignified determination. The refusal to collapse. The way her mother had always said hard things simply and then got on with living. She pressed her hands together in her lap. "Your name was Simon," she said. It was the first thing she had said since she sat down. Her voice was steady. She had decided, somewhere in the last 24 hours, that if this moment came she would not perform anything. She would not perform shock or distress or forgiveness or anything else. She would simply be honest. Mr. Caleb looked at her. Something in his face shifted, a small, painful movement, like something that had been held rigid for a long time releasing all at once. "Yes," he said. "Simon Caleb. I stopped using Simon a long time ago. I don't remember exactly when." He paused. Perhaps because it was the name she knew me by. Rebecca looked at this man, this neat, controlled, silver-haired man sitting on the edge of his leather chair with his hands loosely clasped and the remnants of a 30-year-old guilt sitting plainly on his face, and she tried to find words for what she was feeling. She couldn't. There were too many things at once. Too many layers, too many years, too many mornings she had gotten up and looked at her mother's photograph and carried the question around with her like something she'd grown so used to she'd almost stopped noticing the weight. "I saw the photograph," she said. "In the study. The three of you, you and Benjamin and my mother. Her name was written on the back." He nodded. He didn't seem surprised. "I thought you might have. Is that why you asked for my documents?" He was quiet for a moment. "I asked for your documents," he said carefully, "because I needed to be sure. Because I am a man who has spent his whole life dealing in certainties, and I could not let myself believe something this." He paused, searching for the word, "this large without being certain." "And are you?" Rebecca asked. "Certain?" He looked at her. Directly, fully, without flinching. "Yes," he said. "I am." The word landed between them and stayed there. Rebecca looked at the floor. She had imagined this moment before. Not often, she was not a person who spent much time in fantasy. But occasionally as a child, she had let herself imagine what it would be like to sit across from her father and hear him say something that made everything make sense. She had always imagined it would feel like relief. Like a door opening. It did not feel like a door opening. It felt more like standing in a field after a long, long time underground. The light was real. The air was real. But her eyes had not yet adjusted, and everything was very bright and very overwhelming, and she did not yet know which direction to walk. She looked up. "My mother worked as a seamstress," she said. Her voice was quiet. "She worked from a table near the window. She took in other people's clothes and she mended them and she made enough for us to live. She bought me books. She came to every school event. She baked me a cake every birthday even when money was very tight." She looked at him steadily. "She raised me alone. For 16 years she raised me completely alone. And then she got sick and she died and I was 16 years old and I was alone in a different way after that." Mr. Caleb did not look away. He received every word. His face did not try to manage its expression. "She died," he said. Very quietly. "Yes." He pressed his hands together tightly. His eyes went to the floor for a moment, just a moment, and then came back. "I did not know that," he said. "There is a lot you did not know," Rebecca said. "Because you chose not to know." The words were not cruel. They were not shouted. They were simply true, said in the same quiet, direct voice she said everything. And that, somehow, made them land harder than any shout could have. Mr. Caleb said nothing. He simply sat with it. And Rebecca, who had learned patience in harder schools than most, let him. The clock in the hallway ticked. The room had gone fully dark now outside the windows. The sitting room lamp threw its warm yellow light across the two of them. The man and the young woman, sitting across from each other in the leather chairs, the low table between them. After a long silence, Rebecca spoke again. "I used to watch the other children on Father's Day," she said. She had not planned to say this. It simply came. "At church, when the pastor asked fathers to stand, I used to look at the floor. I told myself it was fine. That lots of children didn't have fathers. That it didn't mean anything." She paused. I told myself that for a very long time. Mr. Caleb's jaw moved. A small, tight movement. When I was in school, she continued, a teacher asked us to draw a picture of our family. I drew myself and my mother. And then I looked at the empty space beside us and I didn't know what to put there. She looked at him. I left it empty. The teacher asked me about it afterward and I said it was just me and my mum. And she nodded and moved on. Pause. But I kept thinking about that empty space for years. He made a sound, low, involuntary. Not quite a word. The sound of something breaking very quietly inside a contained man. He leaned forward and put his face in his hands. He did not cry. He was not a man who cried easily, and perhaps he had used up whatever permission he had given himself for that last night, alone in his study. But he sat with his face in his hands for a long moment, and when he lifted it again his eyes were red at the edges and his face had lost every last trace of the careful control he usually wore. Rebecca, he said. His voice was rough. I have no right to ask you for anything. I want you to know that I understand that completely. I am not going to sit here and ask for forgiveness as if it is something I have earned. He shook his head. I haven't earned it. I don't know that I ever can. She looked at him. But I need to say something to you, he continued. Even if it means nothing to you. Even if you choose to walk out of this house tonight and never come back, which I would understand. He looked at her with his reddened eyes. I am sorry. I am sorry for what I did to your mother. I am sorry for what I took from you without ever meaning to face the cost of it. I am sorry that you grew up drawing empty spaces and pictures. I am sorry that you sat in church and looked at the floor. I am sorry that your mother worked at a table by a window alone, when she should never have been alone. His voice dropped to almost nothing. I am sorry that she is gone and I never got to tell her that. The room was very quiet. Rebecca sat with all of it. She let it settle around her like something that had been falling for a very long time and had finally reached the ground. She thought about her mother. About that laugh in the photograph, open and free and holding nothing back. She thought about what her mother had written. I raised our child to be better than the fear that made you run away. She looked at the man across from her. 61 years old, successful, silver-haired, sitting in an expensive chair in a beautiful house with his eyes red and his hands open in his lap and 30 years of guilt spread quietly across his face. She thought about what she felt. She felt the anger still. That slow banked heat. It was still there and she didn't pretend it wasn't. But she also felt, and this surprised her, or perhaps it didn't, perhaps her mother had made sure of it, something else. Something that was not yet forgiveness, because forgiveness was not a thing that appeared all at once like a light being switched on. It was something slower. Something that had to be grown. But it was the beginning of it. The very small, fragile, first beginning. She took a breath. I am not going to walk out tonight, she said. He looked up. I'm not ready to forgive you, she said honestly. I don't know when I will be. Or even if I don't know. She looked at her hands for a moment, then back at him. But I have spent my whole life not knowing who you were. Carrying a question with no answer. And now I have an answer. She paused. Even if the answer is hard. Even if it hurts, I would rather have it than not. He nodded. Very slowly. Then what would you like to do? He asked. And he meant it. He asked it with genuine openness, no agenda behind it. He was leaving it entirely to her. What do you need from me? Rebecca thought about it. I need time, she said. I need to think about all of this properly, away from this house, in my own space. I need to feel what I feel without having to be anyone's maid while I feel it. He nodded. Of course. And I have one question, she said, that I need you to answer truthfully. Anything, he said. She looked at him directly. Did you ever think about us? She asked. Even once in 30 years, did you ever wonder what happened to her? To the baby? He held her gaze. He did not answer quickly. He did not reach for the comfortable answer. He sat with the question the way it deserved to be sat with. Yes, he said finally. Not often. I worked very hard to make sure it wasn't often. He paused. But yes. In the quiet moments, the ones I couldn't fill with work or plans or the next thing, yes. I wondered. He looked at her. I was just too afraid of the answer to go looking for it. Rebecca nodded. She stood up slowly. She picked up her bag from beside the chair and held it in both hands. Good night, sir, she said. And then she paused because that word, sir, felt strange in her mouth now in a way it hadn't before. Like wearing a coat that no longer fit. He noticed it too. She could see it in his face. Neither of them said anything about it. Not yet. She walked down the hallway and through the front door and along the flower-lined path to the gate. The night air was cool and clean. Above the city's glow, a few stars were visible. She let herself out and walked to the bus stop. And for the first time in her life, the question she had carried since she was 6 years old, the one she had drawn as an empty space in a picture, the one she had looked at the floor to avoid, the one she had carried quietly and alone for 23 years, was no longer a question. It was still painful. It was still complicated. It was still something she would have to sit with for a long time before she knew what shape it would finally take in her life. But it was no longer empty. And that, for tonight, was enough. The weekend passed quietly. Mr. Caleb moved through his house in a different kind of silence than usual. Not his working silence, that focused, productive stillness that filled the rooms on weekday mornings. This was something else. Looser. More uncertain. The silence of a man who had said the truest thing he had ever said in his life and was now living in the space that came after it, not yet knowing what would grow there. He did not call anyone. He did not open his laptop. He sat in the garden on Saturday afternoon, on the wooden bench beneath the mango tree, the one that looked slightly less controlled than the rest, and stayed there for a long time doing nothing at all. He could not remember the last time he had done nothing at all. He thought about Rebecca. About the way she had sat across from him and received everything he said without flinching and given him honesty in return, clean, direct, without cruelty. He thought about the things she had told him. The seamstress at the table by the window. The birthday cakes. The empty space in the picture. He thought about Victoria. He had known her for less than 2 years, 30 years ago. But she had been, in the way that certain people are, completely herself. There had been no performance to her, no careful management of how she appeared. She had laughed with her whole face. She had said what she meant. She had written him a letter from a place of dignified heartbreak and predicted exactly what would happen to him, and she had been right. He hoped, sitting under the mango tree in the afternoon light, that wherever she was, she knew. He was not a praying man, particularly. But he sat there and thought it anyway, quietly, in the direction of wherever such things go. I'm sorry, Victoria. I'm sorry it took me this long. Rebecca came back on Monday. 6:55 as always. The bell at the gate. Her calm face in the morning light. Mr. Caleb opened the gate himself, also as always, and they looked at each other for a moment. Good morning, she said. Good morning, he said. And then carefully, how are you? Not the polite, automatic version of that question. The real one. She considered it properly. I'm still thinking, she said. But I'm all right. He nodded. Take whatever time you need. She went inside. The week that followed was a careful one. They were both finding their way around something new, something that existed now in the space between them that hadn't existed before. The truth had changed the shape of everything even while the surface of things looked the same. She still made his breakfast. He still said thank you. She still moved through the house with her quiet, methodical care. But there were small differences. He started leaving the study door open more often. She noticed. He began saying goodnight to her when she left in the evenings, not just a nod but an actual word. She noticed that too. Once, on Wednesday, she was in the kitchen making his tea and he came in and sat at the kitchen table. The second time he had ever done that, and he said, without preamble, "Did she keep your photographs? Your mother? Did she take pictures of you when you were small?" Rebecca looked at him from across the kitchen. Some, she said. Not many. We didn't have a camera. Sometimes a neighbor would take one. He nodded as if noting something down somewhere inside himself. What were you like? He asked. As a child. She looked at him for a moment. Then she turned back to the kettle. Quiet, she said. Serious. I read a lot. My mother used to say I was born 40 years old. She paused. I didn't have many friends when I was small, but the friends I had were loyal. She poured the tea. I was good at school. Especially mathematics. He was quiet for a moment. And then, very softly, almost to himself, I was good at mathematics too. She set his cup on the table in front of him. Neither of them said anything else. But something in the room had shifted again, slightly, carefully, the way things shift when they are being rebuilt from the ground up, one small piece at a time. It was the following Friday evening when he asked to speak with her again. She came to the sitting room the same way she had the week before and sat in the same chair, and he sat across from her. But this time he did not seem like a man carrying something unbearable. He seemed like a man who had made a decision and was at peace with it. He had a folder on the table in front of him. She looked at it but said nothing. I want to say something, he began, and I want you to hear it properly before you respond. She looked at him. All right. You are my daughter, he said, simply, directly. Nothing will change that. Not time, not what I did, not anything. That is simply the truth. He looked at the folder. But I am also aware that a truth does not undo 30 years. I am aware that I cannot walk back into your life as if I were simply late for something. Rebecca said nothing. She was listening. But I would like to try, he said. Whatever form that takes. Whatever pace you need. I am not going anywhere. He paused. I have been going somewhere my whole life. Always the next project, the next goal, the next thing to build. I think perhaps I was always moving so I wouldn't have to stop and look at what I had left behind. He placed his hand on the folder. I do not want you to work as a maid in my house, he said. I want to say that clearly. Not because there is anything wrong with the work. There isn't. But because you are my daughter, and I will not sit at a table and be served by my own daughter while I still have breath in my body. He slid the folder across the table toward her. I would like you to come to my company. I will start you properly, trained, paid well, learning the business from the inside. I have built something over 30 years, and I have no one to pass it to. He met her eyes. I would like, if you are willing, to begin changing that. Rebecca looked at the folder. Inside she knew there would be papers. Formal things. Mr. Caleb's language, documents, certainties, things written down. She did not open it yet. She looked at him for a long moment. I told you I'm not ready to forgive you, she said. I know. I meant it. This, she gestured at the folder, this doesn't change that. I won't pretend that a business offer fixes what needs to be fixed. I know that too, he said. This is not an offer I am making to fix anything. It is an offer I am making because it is right. Because it is what should have been available to you from the beginning. He looked at her steadily. Whatever happens between us, whatever you decide about us, this is yours because you are mine. It belongs to you regardless. Rebecca looked down at the folder. She thought about her small apartment. The 4 flights of stairs, the lift that worked 3 days out of 7, the patch of damp in the corner of the ceiling. She thought about the years of small jobs, stretched money, the careful independent life she had built from what was available to her. She thought about what her mother had worked for at that table by the window. What her mother had given up so that she could have something more. She put her hand on the folder. I will think about it, she said. I'm not saying yes yet. I need to think. That is all I ask, he said. She stood. She picked up her bag. And then she did something she hadn't planned, something that surprised her as she did it. She reached out and picked up the folder from the table. Not to read it tonight. Just to take it with her. To let it come home with her and sit on her table and be a thing she could look at in her own space on her own time. Mr. Caleb watched her pick it up. Something moved across his face that he didn't try to hide. Good night, she said. Good night, Rebecca, he said. And for the first time the word felt different in his mouth. Not Rebecca the maid. Not Rebecca who started last week, Grace recommended her. Just Rebecca. She walked to the door. She did not come to work the following Monday. Or Tuesday. Mr. Caleb did not call her. He had promised her time and he intended to keep that promise, even as the house felt the particular emptiness of waiting. He made his own breakfast. He left his own dishes in the sink. He ate lunch standing in the kitchen and dinner at the dining table alone. On Tuesday evening he sat in the sitting room with the lamp on and a book he wasn't reading and thought about how quiet a house could be when you had spent 30 years filling the silence with work and had suddenly run out of ways to do that. He thought about calling Benjamin. He decided against it. This was not ready to be talked about yet, not in the easy, anecdotal way that Benjamin talked about things. This was still too new, too tender. He went to bed early and lay there looking at the ceiling. On Wednesday morning, just after 8 o'clock, the gate bell rang. He went to the window. Rebecca was standing at the gate. She was not wearing her work clothes. She had on a simple blue dress, the kind of thing a person wears for themselves, not for a job. Her bag was over her shoulder. Her face was calm. He went downstairs and opened the gate. She looked at him. I would like to accept the offer, she said. The company. The training. She paused. I want to learn it properly. From the beginning. He looked at her for a moment. Good, he said. Simply and warmly. Good. She came through the gate. He made breakfast that morning. Himself, not perfectly, the eggs slightly more done than they should have been, the toast a shade too dark. He put it on the table and looked at it critically. It's fine, Rebecca said, sitting down. It isn't, he said. You've been making mine better for a month. She picked up her fork and ate without responding to that, but the corner of her mouth moved. He sat across from her. They ate together at the long dining table that had been set for one person for as long as either of them could remember. Him for 30 years, her for her whole adult life. The morning light came in through the tall windows. The clock ticked in the hallway. It was not a comfortable meal exactly. It was not easy the way easy things are. But it was real. Two people sitting at a table, learning how to be in the same room in a new way, without the roles they had been using to manage the distance between them. After a while Rebecca said, "You burned the toast." "I know," he said. "The eggs are overdone. I'm aware." My mother would have been horrified. It came out before she could decide whether to say it. The word mother dropped naturally into the conversation, and with it the first small, unexpected flicker of something lighter. Not quite a smile but close. He looked at her. She had very high standards, he said quietly, with the particular care of a man speaking about someone he had known only briefly but thought about for a long time. Rebecca looked at her plate. "Yes," she said. She did. A silence. But a different kind, not heavy, not waiting for something. Just the ordinary quiet of two people eating breakfast together for the first time. 3 days later, Grace came to visit. She arrived on a Saturday morning with a container of food, something she had cooked at home, wrapped carefully, the way she always brought things, and rang the gate bell with her usual punctuality. Mr. Caleb opened the gate. Grace looked at him. Then past him at the house. Then back at him. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "Rebecca told me she wasn't working here anymore and I wanted to." "Come in, Grace," he said. "There is something I need to tell you." She came in, carrying her container, her expression alert with the particular attention of someone who can tell that a conversation is going to be more complicated than expected. They went to the sitting room. Rebecca was already there, sitting in one of the leather chairs with a cup of tea, wearing the same blue dress. Grace looked at her. "You're here?" she said, surprised. "I'm here," Rebecca said. Grace looked between them, from Rebecca to Mr. Caleb and back again. Her eyes narrowed slightly, the way a person's eyes narrow when they are trying to read a room and the room is not cooperating. She sat down. Mr. Caleb sat across from them both. He was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Grace directly. "When you recommended Rebecca to me," he said, "you did something you could not have known the full weight of." He paused. "Rebecca is my daughter, Grace. I did not know it when she arrived. She did not know it when she arrived. But it is the truth, and it has been confirmed, and I want you to hear it from me." Grace stared at him. She looked at Rebecca. Rebecca looked back at her, steady and calm. Grace started. Stopped. Her eyes went wide. She pressed one hand over her mouth and sat there for a long moment with her eyes moving back and forth between the two of them. "Your daughter." "Yes," Mr. Caleb said. "Rebecca," Grace breathed. She turned to her. "Did you know? Did you, when I brought you here, did you?" "No," Rebecca said. "I had no idea. Not when I came. Not for the first 2 weeks." She held Grace's gaze. "I found out the same way you're finding out now, one piece at a time until there was enough to be certain." Grace took her hand from her mouth slowly. She looked at the container of food she had set on the table. She looked at the ceiling. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a cry but something between the two. "Grace," Mr. Caleb said, with something in his voice that Grace had never heard there before, something gentle and unhidden. "I want you to know that the reason any of this is possible, the reason she came through that door at all, is because of you." He looked at her steadily. "You brought her here. You trusted me with her. You did not know what you were doing but you did it." He paused. "I don't know how to properly thank you for that." Grace pressed her lips together very tightly. She was not going to cry. She had never cried in this house in 5 years and she was not about to start now. She almost managed it. "Oh," she said in a very small voice. And then she picked up her container and set it back down again and looked at Rebecca and said, "I brought groundnut soup. I didn't know we were celebrating, I just came to check on you but," she waved her hand at the container, "it's enough for 3. Rebecca smiled. It was the most complete smile she had shown in this house, full and warm and reaching her eyes. "Then we'll eat together," she said. Benjamin arrived later that afternoon, unannounced, the way he always arrived, with a loud car and no warning. He came through the door into the sitting room and stopped. Rebecca was at the dining table helping Grace serve the food. Mr. Caleb was carrying chairs from the side of the room to make space for everyone. Grace was directing both of them with the authority of someone who has spent 5 years knowing exactly how this kitchen worked. Benjamin stood in the doorway and took it all in. His eyes moved to Mr. Caleb, then to Rebecca, then back to Mr. Caleb. Something happened in his face. Not surprise exactly. More like the expression of a man watching a puzzle he has been carrying for 30 years finally arranging itself into the picture it was always supposed to be. He looked at Rebecca again. At her face. Her eyes. He had seen it the first day. He had dismissed it as imagination. He had told himself he was tired, that he was seeing things that weren't there. He had been wrong. Caleb, he said slowly. Mr. Caleb looked at him from across the room. She's Victoria's daughter, Benjamin said. It wasn't a question. She's my daughter, Mr. Caleb said. Quietly. Clearly. With a weight and a warmth that the word might had perhaps never carried in his mouth before. Benjamin stood in the doorway for a moment longer. And then he walked across the room and pulled Mr. Caleb into a hug. A real one, the kind that old friends give each other when words are not enough. Mr. Caleb stood stiffly for a moment, the way contained men do when they are caught off guard by warmth. And then he put one hand on his old friend's back and held it there. Benjamin stepped back. His eyes were bright. He turned to Rebecca. He looked at her for a moment with an expression that was full of something, years of knowing, years of watching, years of carrying a story that he had always known was unfinished. Your mother, he said, was one of the finest people I have ever known. His voice was careful. Genuine. She deserved a great deal better than what she got from both of us, because I knew what he did, and I did not do enough to make him fix it. He paused. I am sorry for my part in that. Rebecca looked at this large, warm, honest man who had been her father's oldest friend and had seen her mother's face in hers across a hallway without knowing what it meant. Thank you, she said. It was enough. They ate together. All four of them, at the long dining table that had been set for one for 30 years. Grace's groundnut soup, served with rice, filling the dining room with a warmth and smell that the room had perhaps never held before. Benjamin told a story about his flight home that made Grace cover her mouth and shake with laughter. Mr. Caleb sat at the head of the table and ate and listened and said very little, the way he always did, but there was something different about his silence now. It was not the silence of a man alone in a room. It was the silence of a man who was, for the first time in a very long time, exactly where he was supposed to be. Rebecca sat beside him. She ate her soup and listened to Benjamin's story and watched Grace laugh and felt the warmth of it move through her, cautious still, careful still, but real. Undeniably real. She was not going to pretend that everything was resolved. It wasn't. There were still years of absence to account for, still complicated feelings to work through, still a relationship that was not yet built and would have to be constructed slowly, like something that takes time to get right. She was not going to pretend that the wound was healed. It wasn't. It would take a long time to heal, maybe longer than she could currently imagine. But she was sitting at a table with her father. She had a father. A complicated, imperfect, silver-haired, slightly emotionally controlled man who burned toast and had spent 30 years running from something and had finally, at 61, stopped running. She had a father. She looked sideways at him. He was listening to Benjamin, and there was the hint of that small, brief smile on his face, the one she had seen on her first day, the one that appeared and disappeared so quickly. The one that, she understood now, was all the more precious for being rare. He felt her looking at him. He turned. Their eyes met. He did not smile, not the small smile, not any smile. He simply looked at her. Directly, fully, with no control over his face at all, with 30 years of regret and an entire morning's worth of overcooked eggs and something new and frightening and necessary in his eyes. She looked back. For a moment they were just two people. Not employer and employee. Not a wrong waiting to be righted. Not a 30-year-old story or a question that had finally found its answer. Just a father and a daughter at a table at the very beginning of something. She looked back at her soup. He looked back at Benjamin. And the afternoon went on. A few days later, Rebecca came downstairs in the morning and went to the kitchen. Not to start work, but simply because it was where she went now when she came to this house. She was not wearing her work clothes. She had on her own things, a simple top, neat trousers, her own shoes. She had left her maid's uniform folded on the chair in the small back room, and something about leaving it there, setting it down, walking away from it, felt like setting down something much heavier. She put the kettle on. Mr. Caleb came downstairs and found her in the kitchen, and he stopped for a moment in the doorway. He looked at her. No uniform. Her own clothes. Her own self, standing at his kitchen counter, completely at home and completely her own person at the same time. He went to the cabinet and took out 2 cups. Set them both on the counter. Neither of them made a big thing of it. It was just 2 cups instead of 1. It was a small thing. The smallest thing. It was everything. Outside, the city was already awake, loud and bright and rushing forward the way it always did. The market sellers setting up their tables. The school children in their uniforms. The buses filling and emptying and filling again. The ordinary world doing its ordinary things. But inside the big white villa on the palm tree street, something had changed. The house that had been too large for one person for 30 years was beginning, slowly, to fit two. The silence that had been the silence of absence was becoming, one breakfast at a time, one careful conversation at a time, one small and tentative step at a time, the silence of something that had been lost and was now, with great patience and no small amount of courage on both sides, being found. It would not be easy. It would not be fast. Healing never is. But it had begun. And sometimes, in a story that has been waiting 30 years for its last chapter, beginning is enough. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed creating it. Like, share, and comment on the lessons you've learned. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. See you in my next video.